Hi guys and welcome back. In this video we're going to learn about return values in functions, and this is something really confusing for new Python developers. Here we've got a function called add that prints x and y. If we call add with the values 5 and 8, it should print 13. So let's run that and you'll see that 13 gets printed out. However, something that we have been doing with some other functions in our code has been assigning the value of it to a variable. For example, result equal add 5 and 8. If we then print result, you could potentially expect 13 to be printed out. However, here's what's going to happen. We're going to run line 5, which is going to start running the function, and it's going to print 13. Then we're going to run line 6, which is again going to run the function, because here, notice there is a function call, and that is going to run this line, which is going to print 13. Then we are going to assign something to the result variable. And finally, we're going to print the result variable. So we should see 13, 13, and then the value of the result variable printed out. So we're going to print out 3 lines. And you can see that we get 13, 13, and then none. None is a special value in Python that means no value or missing value or undeclared value. Take your pick. So that means that this function here, when it finished running, did something that made our result variable be equal to none. Because when we printed result, it printed none, therefore result must be none. So that is where return values come in. Functions return none. That's what they do by default. That means that whenever you call a function, you can assign its return value to a variable, or you can use it in another part of your program, such as a mathematical expression or something like that. And that return value is what you'll get when you call the function. So functions return none by default, which means that the result variable is being assigned to none. If we want to do it differently, you're going to have to return your own value. So we're going to say return x plus y without the brackets instead of print. Now, there's an important thing, which is that if we remove these lines, I'm just going to put the hash symbol in front of them, which signals that they are a comment, and they won't run when the code runs. If we press play now, you'll see that nothing gets printed out, because of course we've executed the add function, but this function does not print anything. It just returns something. So, because we're not printing anything, nothing gets printed out. Now, if we do this, we call the add function, which returns the addition of the 2 arguments, 5 and 8, and then make it equal to the result variable. That means that result is going to be equal to the return value of the function, which is going to be 13, and then we're going to print 13. So when we run this code, you'll see 13. At this point, I'll say that very often I will see students doing this, print x and y, and then they will try to do this, print add 5 and 8. This is a very common thing I see in my courses, and notice that when you run this code, you're going to get 13 and then none. Again, that's because the add function gets called first, in order so that the print function knows what to print. So here it prints 13 and then returns none, because all functions return none by default. So you get 13 printed out, and then you get none printed out. And this is very common, so if you're seeing this problem or if you've encountered this before, now you know why that is. Let's go back to printing the result of calling the function, and we're going to make it both print and return. So now when we do this, you're going to see 13 printed out twice. One, because the function itself prints 13 out, and the second one because we're actually printing the return value of the function that we've assigned to our variable. Return not only gives a value back to the caller at the end of the function, it actually terminates the function entirely. So if we were to move this return value to before the print, and then press play, you'll see that only 113 gets printed out, because as soon as the function reaches this return statement, it returns and exits the function and gives the value back to the caller. So this print function never gets called. Only this one does. That is another common problem, that some people will put a return value elsewhere in the function, as well as the one at the end of the function. This is totally fine, you can do that, but just make sure that it is what you want, because when you return without a value, you're actually going to return none by default. So by putting a return here in line 2, it means that none of these lines are going to run, because the function will terminate when you encounter a return, and this here will become none, because there is a return with no value, which means return none. So result will be none, and you'll end up printing none out. If we press play, you'll see that none comes out. Let's go back to our divide function from the last video, but now instead of printing out, we're going to return. So here we've got a divide function with a dividend and a divisor. If the divisor is not 0, we're going to return the division, otherwise we're going to return the string you fool. So if we divide 15 by 3 and we print the result out, we should see a number coming out, and we do get 5.0. But if you decide to go for 15 and 0, and then you press play, you'll see that you fool gets printed out. This is fine, you can totally do 2 returns in a single function. As long as only one of them runs, which is what happens in this if statement, you can still access both returns depending on these conditions here. So again, a return will terminate the function when the line is ran and give the value returned back to the caller. So in this case, this function call here will be replaced essentially by whatever the function returns when it runs. As an aside, it's usually not recommended to have functions returning multiple different types of data. For example, this function can return a number or a string, just because if you wanted to perform mathematics on the return value of this function, you will encounter problems if you do return a string. For example, if you wanted to print out the result of dividing this multiplied by 5, then of course you're going to get you fool, you fool, you fool, you fool. However, if you change the number, then you'll actually get a valid mathematical number. So usually not recommended to return different types of data from a function, although, as I said, you can do it. It's just not advised. That's everything for this video. Thank you for joining me in this one, and I'll see you in the next one.